but still it is working. I remember we moved to a very new building when we were another graduate student at Purdue. We moved to a new building. It was about 12-story building, and my office was the 10th floor. That's the last floor. Actually, 2 floors below also, so 12-floor building. We had 2 new Westinghouse elevators that were fixed, and we always had problem going down. That lift won't. So we cut a huge poster of Westinghouse, whose advertisement was Westinghouse never lets you down. So we put it on the 10th floor. Okay. So it's like for the first time, I think I've been with the institute for more than about half a century. This is the first time that they failed, and that also because probably when we closed the door, it bounced back a little bit, and there was a gap, didn't close. Anyway. Okay, so we were talking about complete spaces, complete metric spaces, and we saw 2 particular examples. So in particular, when we say X row is said to be complete, if every Cauchy sequence in X row converges in X row to an element in X row, okay, converges in X row. And the basic examples we saw were this LPNR and similarly the LPNC for 1 less than equal to p less than equal to infinity. They are all complete metric spaces, including the L infinity. The other example we saw was when you have infinite number of components, LPR and LPC are complete metric spaces. Okay. Look at some more examples as we go along. Okay. So what I will do now is sort of illustrate some situation where we need completeness. Why do we need this concept of completeness? Okay. So we will look at put a framework and see how this completeness plays a role in a general class of problems. Okay. A general, there are many. So I will just call it role of completeness. There are many. A role, this is one of the classical roles of completeness that was very useful in analysis. So the first thing that I am going to look at is functions mapping a metric space into itself. Okay. So I am going to look at metric space X row. And then which maps X to X, takes every point X to X. So I am going to look at a mapping of a metric space into itself. So I have X and F the function. The moment you think that it is onto also, and think it's not necessarily, I am not going to look at onto function. It is like some kind of elastic material, it has been twisted, shrunk, etc. And you get the same material again. So it's a mapping from the set to itself. Okay. So it's some kind of elasticity that is taking place there. I use the word elasticity. Now I am going to use almost a similar from elasticity. Okay. So suppose I take 2 points X2 and look at their images. x1 is mapped to fx1 and x2 is mapped to fx2. So, think of it as a small piece, 2 points in an elastic piece, and look at the length from x1 to x2. So, I have to translate that in the language of metric spaces. The length means distance from x1 to x2. So, I look at the distance from x1 to x2 and correspondingly I look at what happens to the distance after the deformation. F is some kind of a deformation. So, after the deformation I look at the distance. Basically, if you look at the ratio, when I put ratio, I must make sure the denominator is not 0, but I am taking two different points x1 and x2, so that is not rho x1, x2 is not 0. This is all intuitive motivation, we will the formal definition shortly. So, suppose I take the ratio, it is some kind of a measure of how much damage that this elastic transformation is doing in terms of linear length concept. Okay, that is what you call strain and whatever technical term you use in elastic language, elasticity language. But this is what is happening at the point x1. I fix the point x1, I look at x2, various x2s, I will get various such ideas. So, what I do is, I look at a situation where everything works within some elastic limit. That means there is constant k, suppose there exists a constant k which is positive, such that if you look at the deformation, it is always within this limit k for any x1 and x2. Something like a Hooke's law. Okay. It acts within certain elastic limit. The deformation cannot be beyond a certain limit. It all works within certain elastic limit. Okay. So, as I vary x1 and x2, I get a large collection of numbers. This is a number, real number, non-negative real number, and this is a non-negative positive real number, and therefore I look at all these ratios. So, I get a collection of real numbers, but all those real numbers are bounded, they are all within some k. So, whenever a bounded set of real numbers, it will have a least upper bound. So, I am going to call it the least upper bound of this ratio as x1 and x2 vary over x, x1 not equal to x2. If x1 equal to x2, I will have some problem, 0 by 0 problem and all kinds of problems. Okay. So, I will have this ratio is finite because everything is bounded. So, there is an upper bound. Now, this upper bound can take as some kind of a measure of the elastic limit within which we are operating. So, this least upper bound we will give some name. Okay. So, we will call it as, we call this, okay, denote this by let us say EF, the elastic limit of the mapping F. Okay. So, therefore, we have rho Fx1 Fx2 divided by rho x1 x2 is less than or equal to EF for every x1 x2 in X. So, suppose I have look at such functions on the metric space. Okay. So, those which are operating within certain elastic limits, all those functions. Now, I am going to look at a particular class of elasticity. There are first order, second order, third order elasticities. So I am going to one particular type of elasticity where this deformation never exceeds 1. That is, EF is strictly less than 1. So suppose EF is less than 1. Okay. Then we call it a contraction mapping. Then the mapping F is called a contraction mapping. Then F is of course, if this ratio is constant for all points, that means it is uniform contraction. If it is uniformly at all points, if the ratio is exactly half, then the maximum is also half, and therefore the distances are always exactly half this. That means we are uniformly contracting. It is like taking a photograph and then taking a cabinet size printout and a postcard size printout, and everything has been uniformly contracted. But the elasticity may not be homogeneous, it may be very heterogeneous. At different points we may get different ratios. However, overall they are all within certain limits. So we are going to look at such transformations for which this elastic limit is less than 1, and such transformations are called contraction map. So what happens to such fellows? We have rho of fx1, fx2 is less than or equal to EF rho x1, x2, where EF is less than 1 non-negative. Okay, that is what we are going to take as the definition of a contraction mapping. So we will give a formal definition. A function f mapping a metric space x rho into itself is called a contraction map on x rho if there exists a real constant EF such that 0 less than equal to EF less than 1, such that rho of the distance between the images of between any 2 points is less than or equal to EF times the rho of the original distance. That is why it is called distances are contracted. Original distance and smaller is bigger than the image distance. We will see a lot of contraction mappings. I mean, when we do a full, I do not know whether in this part of functional analysis course, maybe if we extend it in the next semester or some other time, continuation of this, we will see, we will need more and more of information about this contraction maps. However, let me give one situation where probably many of us are familiar with. Okay. So, give all the proofs, but I will only indicate and illustrate. But okay, an example. Just one example I will give. So it's a one general class of examples. Okay, that sense. Now suppose so let us consider the the metric space X row to be our, let us take real, we will take complex itself so that it substitutes vectors also. Okay. So, let us take the L2NC standard vector space. We all know the distance is the standard distance, square root of the sum of the squares of the difference of the coordinates in absolute value. So, let us take this metric space, and then what does this consist of? This consists of vectors with n components. Each element in this space is a vector with n components, and the components can be complex numbers, and the distance is defined as the usual distance between 2 points in the complex plane. Okay. So, that is the not the complex plane, between two n complex vectors. Okay. So, if x is x1, x2, xn, y equal to y1, y2, yn, this belongs to L2 and C, then rho 2 xy is defined as summation j equal to 1 to n mod xj minus yj squared. That is our notation. So, I have this metric space. Now, I am going to define a simple transformation on this. So, how does a function look like all this? It takes an n component vector and converts it into another n component vector, and we know matrices do that. If I take an n component vector and pre-multiply it by an n by n matrix, again I will get an n component vector. So, let M be and a fixed n by n complex matrix. When I say complex, it could also be real, because every real number is also a complex number. Consider an n by n complex matrix. Then define F mapping L2NC to L2NC as f of any vector x is just m times x. Take a vector, pre-multiply it by the matrix M. So, every vector has been coded as a different vector. So, f is actually a coding, and contraction is the distance between the message and the is reduced when you look at the distance between the codes. Okay. So, every vector x has been coded as m times x. Now, under some conditions m will become, this f will become a contraction mapping. And what are those conditions? The various ways of stating that. One important statement about that is that, suppose I have a matrix M, complex matrix M, complex square matrix M, then it has n eigenvalues, right? Any n by n matrix will have n eigenvalues. Some of them may be repeated, I do not mind, but I will count the repetitions every time it occurs. Okay. So, it will have n eigenvalues. These eigenvalues may be real or complex, both. Okay. So, therefore, I will locate them and plot them in the complex plane. I will get at most n numbers, n points in the complex plane. Now, I try to locate the largest modulus. In other words, around the center, I draw a circle such that all these fellows are inside that. Okay. So, let lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda n be the eigenvalues of they may be complex and may repeat. Okay. So, I have n complex eigenvalues. What I do is I look at their modulus and then take the maximum. So, I will put equal to, I will use a symbol there. The maximum of, you look at all the moduli, look at all the eigenvalues and look at the moduli, look at the maximum. Then you will find, suppose this is some number 10, then if you draw a circle of radius 10 about the center, there will be no more eigenvalue outside. Outside the circle is free from eigenvalues. So, it is the smallest circle around the center, outside which there are no eigenvalues. This is called the spectral radius of the matrix M. Okay, it is called the notation used for that is that. It is called the spectral norm or the spectral radius of the matrix M. So, I given a matrix M, it is n by n, find out all its eigenvalues and then find the largest absolute value, and that number is called the spectral radius. It is a real number because they are all moduli, and it is non-negative because again they are all moduli. So, it is a non-negative real number. So, that is the radius of the circle, that is why it is called radius, and it is called spectral radius because the eigenvalues are called the spectrum of the matrix. So, this is the radius of the circle in which all this spectrum lies. And the word spectrum comes from the fact that in classical mechanics, when you had a real symmetric matrix, the eigenvalues, the kinetic energy written in generalized coordinates was a real symmetric matrix, and its eigenvalues were precisely the frequency spectrum of the normal modes of vibration, and that is why the word spectrum comes from there. Okay. So, that is generalized, wherever you get eigenvalues and ideas, we call them as the spectrum of that fellow. Okay. So, let us not get involved in that. So, number is called the spectral radius of the matrix. So, what does that tell us actually? It tells us that, well, okay, then we can show this is all matrix analysis. Okay, we will see later when if possible do this. We can show that if we take mx and my or mx1, I will use it as mx, my. Suppose I take two vectors x and y and look mx and my and look at the distance between them. Okay, mx and my, and look at it. Basically, I am looking at the image distance because this is nothing but, by the way, this is nothing but rho 2 of fx. So, I am trying to see how I get this contraction idea. Okay. So, rho of fx comma fy is rho of mx comma my, and we can show that this is less than or equal to this. Okay. So, the elastic limit is within rho 2 that spectral radius, because remember we call this number whenever there is a constant k, then it is called the elastic limit, and the maximum, the least upper bound, precisely this spectral radius. And I will also write this, the least upper bound of rho 2 of mx my divided by rho 2 of xy, as x and y vary over L2 n c x not equal to y, is precisely the spectral radius. Okay, so that spectral radius is precisely the elastic limit. Okay, the maximum is precisely that. Okay. So we can show all this. Therefore, we are now looking at a transformation for which there is a constant for which this can happen, and therefore if the spectral radius is less than 1, this EF is less than 1, in place of EF I have spectral radius. So if the spectral radius is less than 1, the matrix defines a contraction mapping on this. Okay. So if the spectral radius of M is strictly less than 1, then the map F mapping X rho L2N C to L2N C defined as Fx equal to Mx is a contraction map. Contraction mapping on L2 and C. Okay. So these eigenvalues will start coming into the picture. See, this is a fundamental thing. These fellows will always be there. So the transformations induced by matrices, the absolute value of the largest absolute valued eigenvalue is less than 1, then the matrix induces a function f, which is a contraction mapping. Okay. Now, in this case, you can even see further, if y belonging to L2 N R C is any fixed vector, then the map Fx equal to Mx plus y. What do? I do first a transformation through M and then shift it by, I translate it by y, translate all the vectors by y. This is also a contraction map, because that under that condition, the rho of Fx, Fy is the same as the rho 2 of Mx plus y and x1, x2, mx1 plus y, mx2 plus y, right? Take this rho 2 distance, what should I do? I take the difference in the coordinates. So I will have the yz coordinate here and yz coordinate there, they will get knocked off, and this will be precisely rho 2 of if the spectral radius is less than 1, this will also be a contraction mapping. So the net result is, if I have a matrix M, n by n complex, whose spectral radius is less than 1, then all transformations of this type, Fx equal to Mx plus y, y equal to 0, I get that world transformation. All transformations of this type Mx plus y, where y is a fixed vector, are contraction mapping. So that is the example. So if M is a fixed n by n complex matrix, then such that the spectral radius of M is strictly less than 1, then for any fixed y in L2 and C, the function fx equal to mx plus y is a contraction mapping on L2 and C. Okay. We'll see generalizations of this a little later, but right now this is the simplest situation where everybody is familiar with matrices, eigenvalues and so on and so forth. So this is the simplest example that we have. Okay. So what? Why am I interested in contraction mappings? I said I want to illustrate why am I interested in completeness, and then I started contraction mapping. So you made a situation worse. Why am I interested in contraction mapping and I am interested in completeness? Okay. So now let us do something. Okay, to put all these loose ends together. I remember one of the AMS meetings. I think it was Professor Bing who dramatically, it was an address to the students. He introduced the notion of fixed point. Okay. So that's what I am going to come to. The way he introduced was very interesting. I'll first write this and then make what I want to say. Okay. So suppose I have any function from the metric space to itself. I don't even consider now a contraction map. Any f from x row to x row. So it is taking points from here and putting them somewhere in the same space. Okay. Suppose there is a point which f takes around and puts it back in the same place. Then that is called a fixed point for that function. Okay. So that's the next notion. Fixed point. So let f map x row to x row. Then a point x in the metric space is called a fixed point for f if fx equal to x. That fellow is very adamant. He refuses to move. He says, I will stay here only. Okay. So, if that point, now there may not be any such point. Everybody may be moving around and there may not be any fixed point. So, how do we know that f has a fixed point? And the theorem is the contraction mapping theorem. If f is a contraction mapping, it must have a fixed point and it must be unique. Period. There is nothing else. Okay. So, a sufficient condition. It doesn't mean that if it is not contraction, it will not have a fixed point. Okay. A sufficient condition for f. So it's only a sufficient condition, not necessary, to have a fixed point is that it be a contraction map. And this is called the contraction mapping theorem. I'll state that theorem now. It's a very fundamental theorem in analysis, in many problems, in differential equation, integral equations, algebraic equations, any functional equation. The existence theorems are all, sometimes even finding a solution is from this contraction mapping theorem. Okay. If f mapping x row to x row is a contraction map, then f has a unique, see, has is the existence, must be a fixed point, and unique, has a unique fixed point. Okay. Now let me give a proof of this, because that's where completeness comes into the picture. Yeah, X row is a complete metric space, and all these things, and X row complete metric space. Yes, any questions? What? Did you stretch your sorry or whatever it is? Directive function event. What about that? What about that? Yes. So everybody is a fixed point, but it is not a contraction marker because the LHS limit is 1. I want less than 1. So the uniqueness is lost. Okay. And otherwise also what I am saying here is, if it is a contraction mapping, this will happen. I didn't say that if this happens it should be a contraction map, right? So this is, whenever you have a contraction map, you are assured of a fixed point and you are assured of a unique fixed point, period. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay. Other maps may or may not have fixed points or may have infinite number of fixed points, like the identity map that just now we gave. But for contraction maps, it must have and it must have unique fixed point. So other maps, the have may be violated or unique may be violated or both may be violated. We do not know. But or both may be satisfied. But in the case of contraction map, both that has and unique have to be satisfied. It must have a fixed point and it must be unique. Okay. Now I am going to indicate the proof. This is a typical proof which basically is what all iteration is about. There are an infinite number of iteration procedures that we do in analysis, whether it is for differential equation, integral equation, etc., etc. This is precisely what all that is. Okay. So what you do is, one good thing about this, what do we do in an iterative process? You start with a guess and then go on improving, quote and unquote. Hopefully you are improving. Okay. And that's what we hope, that from our first guess we calculate second guess, from the second guess we calculate the third guess, and so on and so forth, and as we go along the difference between the guesses gets smaller and smaller, and hopefully that's going to be what we are looking for. This is the general principle of iteration is. What we are going to, but then the question is, what guess do you start with? Okay. In the case of contraction maps, it's irrelevant. You can start with any guess. So let X naught be any, what should I say? Okay. Any vector, any element in X0. That's our first guess. We are looking for a fixed point. We don't even know whether there is one. Okay, so we say, okay, I am going to make a guess. Randomly pick one fellow and say, you are the fixed point. Obviously, it's not going to be, unless serendipity makes you hit on the fixed point straight away. Okay. So what we do is, we now calculate next hopefully the better guess x1, then x2 another better guess, x3 another better guess, and so on. So then we let x1 is equal to fx naught. See, we want to solve this fx equal to x equation, right? We have made a guess, put that here to get the second guess. Put the second guess here to get the third guess, and so on and so forth. We loop around. Okay. And in general, having found x1, x2, xn, we find xn plus 1 as xn plus 1 is equal to fxn. So, f of the previous step is the next step. F of the previous guess is the next new guess. Okay, f of the previous guess is the new guess. So, we can continue this now. Having found xn plus 1, you find xn plus 2 and so on and so forth. Thus, we get a sequence of steps. We get a sequence xn in x row defined like this: xn plus 1 is fxn and x naught is the arbitrary starting point, initial guess. Okay. Now, the strategy is very simple. Claim 1, if f is a contraction map, then xn is a Cauchy sequence. Xn is a Cauchy sequence in X row. We will see all these things. I will indicate the reasons. Now, we invoke the completeness. Because X row is a complete metric space, this will converge to some X. So, claim 2, which is automatic now, since X row is complete, this is where the completeness comes into the picture. Since X row is complete, there exists X in X row such that Xn converges to X in X row, of course. Claim 3, fx equal to x. Claim 3, these are we have to show this. Okay. Claim 3, fxn. Now, I have constructed this sequence. Now, I look at what happens to their images. Fxn converges to fx. Fxn converges to fx. Claim 4, fx equal to x. That is, x is a fixed point. Claim 5, x is the only fixed point. Now, this is, we have shown it has a fixed point, then it is unique. X is the only. Okay. So, that is the line of argument for any iterative process. You start with x naught and you go on looping around an iterating function f. If the iterating function is a contraction in the right metric space, then all these things will happen one by one. Okay. If we had started with a complete metric space and chosen the right iterating function f, and then you will automatically get a fixed point, and that will be unique, etc., etc. Okay. Let us go backwards, okay. Prove one by one. Claim 5 is that suppose there were two fixed points, what will happen? We have to show, suppose x1 and x2 are fixed points, I have to show that x1 must be equal to x2. Okay. Suppose x1 and x2 are two fixed points. So, we want to show that x1 and x2 must be the same. If you want to show some two fellows are the same, the best way to show is that rho of x1, x2 is 0. Okay. So we calculate rho of x1, x2. Should I skip this? Should I skip this or not? This is the standard existence proof. Okay, this is an exercise. I will take the non-trivial. So, rho of x1, x2 is equal to 0. What can you say about rho of x1, x2? What can you say about x1? It is f of x1. x2 is f of x2. So, rho of x1, x2 is equal to rho of fx1, fx2. But that is less than or equal to k times rho of x1, x2. But k is less than 1. So, you can't have a number less than itself unless it's less than or equal to itself unless it is on that side is 0, this side is 0 and you get it. Okay. So, use x1 equal to fx1, x2 equal to fx2 and f contraction. Okay. So, that is almost over. Okay. Now, therefore, we have to go to claim 4. That means we are assuming claim 1, 2, 3 and prove 4. Then we go to 3. For that, you assume 1 and 2 and so on. So, suppose 1, 2, 3 had been proved and we prove claim 4. What is claim 4? That fx is equal to x. X is a fixed point. So, now we have this definition xn plus 1 is equal to fxn. That is how we constructed that sequence. Our iterative sequence was constructed as the next step is for f of the previous step. But now if I let n go to infinity, what happens? Xn plus 1 will go to x. What happens to fxn? It goes to f. Because xn plus 1 tends to x, fxn tends to fx. So, we have assumed up to step 3, then automatically step 4 will be true, x will be equal to fx. So, these are all very simple steps. So, now claim 3. How do I show that fxn converges to fx? The only thing I know is to show that rho fx and fx can be made small. The distance between fxn and fx must be made small. So, let us look at, so to show that rho fxn fx can be made small. You know what my, when I say made small means for every epsilon positive blah blah blah, that it can be made. So, we look at that rho fxn fx is less than or equal to, what is the thing that I use? Contraction map, some EF rho xn x, the elastic limit of that. But what can I say about this? Since xn converges to x, where is that step? 2. Step 2 would have got xn converges to x. Since xn converges to x, I can make this small. If I make something small, 10 times that also I can make small, because I can choose the original small as epsilon by 10. Okay. So, therefore, given since xn converges to x, given epsilon positive, can epsilon 1 positive can get n epsilon 1, that n greater than or equal to n epsilon 1 implies rho xn x is less than epsilon 1. So, now for epsilon greater than 0, choose epsilon 1 is equal to epsilon by EF, and therefore rho fxn fx is less than epsilon f into epsilon by ef for n greater than. So that's it. Given any n, we are able to epsilon, we are able to make it small. Therefore, fxn tends to fx. So now 3 is over. Now we come to that xn converges to x. Why does xn converge to x? By step 1 it is Cauchy and the space is complete and therefore it must converge. So what is left? Only showing that it is a Cauchy sequence. So 2 is already done by this thing. So let me come to, and that's where again the first step is the one where the contraction really comes into the picture and the uniqueness of course. Okay, so claim 1. So to show that xn is Cauchy, what should I do? I should show that xn, xm get closer and closer. That means I must estimate what this is going to be. Whether I can make that small for sufficiently large n and m. That's what I have to. So let us assume that n is different from m. If n is equal to m, there is nothing to prove. That is equal to 0. Okay. So suppose n is not equal to m, one of them must be bigger. Let us assume m comes after n. Okay. So without loss of generality, m is greater than n. So I can write this as less than or equal to rho xn, xn plus 1 plus rho xn plus 1 m. Right? Triangle inequality. Instead of going from xn to m, I go to xn to xn plus 1, then go to m. Then now instead of going from xn plus 1 to m, I can go to xn plus 1 to xn plus 2 and then m. So this is less than or equal to rho xn, xn plus 1 plus rho xn plus 1, xn plus 2 plus rho xn plus 2, xn. Now go on going like that. In the last step I will go to xm minus 1 and then go to xm. So this is less than or equal to rho xn, xn plus 1, xn plus 1, xn plus 2. I go on making one step at a time and the last step will be from xm minus 1 to. Okay. So I have this xn and xm. I go to n plus 1, then n plus 2, then n plus 3 and n plus 4 and until I reach m minus 1 and then go to m. Now I use contraction to estimate this. Okay, so I will, can I erase this? Okay. Look at this. Xn plus 1 is equal to fxn. Okay. So rho xn plus 1 xn is equal to rho fxn, and how do I get xn? As the previous step. Anything is f of the previous step. But now use the action. Rho of the images distance is less than or equal to rho of the original. This image distances. This is the original distance. So n plus 1 to n distance then are equal to n to n minus 1. So what will happen to n to n minus 1? That will be less than or equal to n minus 1 to n minus 1. Right? The same inequality applied now with for n and n plus 1. Now go on applying it. What will happen? Finally I will come to that. Rho xn plus 1 xn is ef to the power of n rho x1 x naught. Okay. So let us write here ef to the power of n rho x1 x naught. I will write subsequently. Let me write this. Now what can I this? It is exactly like this except one shifted that way, so it will be ef to the n plus 1. Again all those fellows will come. So ef to the power of n plus 1 In the last case, I will get EF to the power of m minus 1, I guess, into some number. Okay, m or m to m minus 1, okay, will be f to the power of m. This is how it will come, right? So what did I get? Great in this. What was I wanting to show? I want to show this is small. So this can be made small by choosing m large. So that will be done if I can show that this is small if n and m are large. Now what can I say about this? This is the tail part of the series 1 plus EF square plus EF cube plus EF to the power of 4, etc. But I know that series converges. Why? EF is less than 1 and therefore that can be controlled. So this can be made less than epsilon for Nm greater than epsilon because it is equal to Sm minus Sn, where Sk is the kth partial sum of the convergent series, convergent geometric series 1 plus EF plus EF squared, etc. So therefore the partial sums converge and therefore partial sums are Cauchy and therefore Sm minus Sn can be made small, and that's the end of the story. Therefore I can control this beyond n and m, beyond n epsilon. If I can control this, it means it's a Cauchy sequence. So therefore the sequence of arguments for getting your iterative procedure to get a fixed point is start from any arbitrary fellow and go on bootstrapping. Okay, x naught, fx naught, f of fx naught, and so on, and then you get a sequence. That's it. Once you get the sequence, all the things fall in place. It's Cauchy because contraction map. It converges because it's complete metric space, and because f is contraction again, fxn will converge to fx, correcting, and that will be exactly the fixed point, and the contraction will again say it is a unique fixed point. So every contraction map on a complete metric space has a unique fixed point. Okay. Now we will use this. And I'll show how, I'll just indicate how this contraction mapping theorem is used in the matrix case, in the matrix problems. Okay, that's the, I'll just indicate an application to matrix iteration. So the important part of the completeness is that you are not left hanging in thin air. Once you got that sequence, it's forced to converge to somebody there. Otherwise, you will be doing iteration, but you are getting something which is nothing to do with what you started with and the things that you wanted. Okay, so it makes that these limiting processes are brought under control. Okay, so the matrix situation. So again, let us take A be an n by n. Let me pick now. Should I say okay? N by n complex, real or complex matrix. Okay. The real matrix is also a complex matrix. So look at complex matrix is always convenient. Then one of the typical problems which is at the base of all linear algebra is solving a linear system of equations where the coefficient matrix is n. Okay. Suppose we look at the linear system Ax equal to y, where y is a given fixed vector n component vector. Okay. We want to find x such that Ax equal to typical linear system of equation. Let us assume that we have done an analysis, rank, etc., etc., that it has a solution. We will not waste our time about existence part of it. So we are going to do an iterative method to find the solution. So to find solution by iterative method. So what is the setup? The setup is going to be follows. We look at, we try to get the solution x as the fixed point of a contraction map on L2. That's all. That's how somehow or the other convert the problem to finding the fixed point, that x turns out to be the fixed point of a contraction map. The moment I know that it's a fixed point, I know how to get it. Start with any guess and go on iterating. You will get closer and closer to the solutions, and subsequently stop your iteration when two successive iterations differ by within the limit of error that you are tolerating. So therefore, the moment I set up the problem as that it is a fixed point of some iterative process for a contraction map, I am done. Okay, so that's the idea. So generally, basically, there are three types of such setup. One is called the Jacobi method. The other is called the Gauss-Seidel method. The third is what is known as the relaxation method. Okay. So the standard strategies. In all these iteration processes, there are many. The most fundamental, one of the fundamental thing is Jacobi, and slightly better was the quote unquote better is Gauss-Seidel, and then something called relaxation, which is a more generalization of all these things. So what is the basic idea? The basic idea is look at the matrix coefficient A. This is our given equation. Okay, we are trying to solve that equation. So that matrix A, we split it into three parts. One is only the diagonal, and all the others make it as 0. The other part is only the upper part. The third part is only the lower part. So we will write A can be written as A equal to the diagonal part plus the lower diagonal part, lower triangular part plus the upper triangular part. Okay, you understand? I hope you understand what I mean. So if the matrix is this A11, A1n, A21, A2n, AN1, ANN. So to get D, take all this and put the remaining as 0. To get L, make all these fellows 0 and keep the lower triangular. To keep the U, remove all this as 0 and keep only the upper triangular part. So the diagonal part, the lower triangular part plus the upper triangular part. Okay. then the system becomes system 1 becomes d plus L plus u x equal to 1. Okay, the first strategy, this is called Jacobi's. The Jacobi, what he did was, he keeps the dx and pushes the L plus u, the lower and upper part he pushes to the right side and keeps the d to the left side. And now I want to put d inverse. Now d may or may not be invertible, but you can always make it invertible. If, for example, if any diagonal entry is 0, that means that in the fourth equation the fourth variable is missing, but somewhere along the line it will appear, add that row to it, it will come. If no equation the fourth row appear, that means that variable is unnecessary at all, remove it, okay. There are only n minus 1 equations. Okay, so then what he does is, he writes this as okay. So now this, what his setup is, x equal to f of x, where f is f of x, I will call it as jx plus y. Remember we said that anything like this, if j is has spectral radius less than 1, any transformation like this will be a contraction, jx plus y, where j is minus d inverse L plus u and y is d inverse y. Okay. Then if the spectral radius, this is called the Jacobi matrix, matrix corresponding to the Jacobi iteration. If the spectral radius is less than 1, then we get x as the fixed point for the contraction map F. Okay. That's the Jacobi's idea. Okay. If the spectral radius turns out to be less than 1, so what really it does is, in each equation it retains the first equation, it retains the first variable on the left side and all other variables to the right side. Second equation, it keeps the second variable to the left side, all others to the right, and you make the coefficient of each one of these leading variables 1 by putting the coefficient on the other side, and that is the setup he takes. And then now he calculates, he guess 1, put it on the right side, you get the next guess, put the guess on the right side, you get the third guess, and so on and so forth. That is his iteration process. Okay, and so this will work. Then you have to do a spectral analysis of the Jacobi matrix, and then if the spectral radius is less than 1, and that will give you a nice iterative process. That is the first proposed method by Jacobi. Then Gauss-Seidel, that is the second. The second strategy is basically it's playing around who should remain on the left, who should go to the right. You see, in this you keep the d in the left and all the others to the right. Gauss-Seidel says keep the d and the L on the left, put the u to the right. Of course, you could have had a Gauss-Seidel with the upper being kept on the left, but it's always for iterations better to keep the upper on the right. You will see why. Okay, if you write it down. So in Gauss-Seidel, what he writes is system 1 can be written as d plus L into x is equal to minus ux plus 1. Okay. So he kept the lower triangular part including the diagonal on the left hand side and pushed the upper triangular to the right hand side. Then he pushed it there. again you can make that the diagonals can be made non-zero, and that's guaranteed. Okay. So now this is x equal to fx, where fx is equal to the Gauss matrix plus y, where the Gauss matrix is minus d plus L inverse. So if the spectral radius of the Gauss matrix is less than 1, we get x as fixed point of f. Okay. So that we can do a comparison of the Gauss spectral radius and the Jacobi spectral radius. It always turns, the smaller the spectral radius, the faster the convergence will be, because remember the estimate depended on the series 1 plus EF squared plus EF to the n. So smaller the common ratio of a geometric series, faster the convergence. The errors of the later terms are dying off very fast. So therefore, a comparison of the spectral radius, generally the Gauss seidel has smaller spectral radius than the Jacobi. So it gives a better iterative procedure. Okay. Now the third is called, he keeps the options open and allows you to improve as best as you can depending on your time, money and analysis powers. This is called the actually successive over relaxation method. I will simply call it a relaxation method. Okay. This is a very powerful general method. Okay. So now what one does in this is take the equation and multiply throughout by some constant. Still the system will be same, okay, multiplying both sides by the left hand side. So let omega be not 0, be any complex number, and then system 1 can be written as omega ax equal to omega 1, right? No problem, right? Everything has been multiplied by omega. Since omega is not 0, if x is a solution of this, it will be a solution of that and vice versa. So the two systems are equivalent. Instead of solving this ax equal to y, I can solve omega ax equal to omega y. Now again I can write this as omega d plus omega L plus omega u equal to omega. The a can be written as d plus L plus u, the diagonal part or the lower triangular part plus the upper triangular part. Anything wrong? Into x, of course. Otherwise, monkeys will be equal to apples. Okay. Left side will be a matrix, right side will be a vector. Okay. X equal to y. Now, what I do is, I add a dx and subtract a dx. So, it will become omega minus 1 into dx. I add a dx and subtract a dx. Then I do the same as before. I will keep the lower triangular part and d on this side and take everything else to the other side. Okay, all the other things have been taken to the other side. I hope I have done it correctly. As before, take this to that side, x is equal to minus d plus omega L inverse omega minus 1 into d plus omega u into x plus d plus omega L inverse into omega y. Okay. There you are done. That's it. This is what my fx is, where fx is equal to, I will call it as Rx plus y, where R is the matrix minus D plus omega, I will call it as R omega, D omega plus L inverse into omega minus 1 D plus omega u, and y is D plus omega L inverse into omega into 1. Okay. So, now I have written it in the form, the system is fx equal to. So, therefore, if the spectral radius is less than 1, then we get x as fixed pointer. Okay. Now you see, you have to, the smaller you make the spectral radius, the faster is going to be the convergence of your iterative process. So you have floated a parameter omega. What you do is, now if you calculate the spectral radius of omega, it will be a function of omega. So find the value of omega for which this is minimum, and then apply this. Okay. So this is the sort of analysis that will do there, that is being done. So there will be some crude analysis that will be done to fix omega, which makes the spectral radius as small as possible, and then apply with that omega this scheme, and you get as good a rate of convergence as you can get. Okay. So the idea is, to choose omega which gives lowest value for the spectral radius, and then apply this scheme. You can now think of many such splitting business of the matrix A, and then finally putting it in this form, and then it will boil down to a fixed point search. Okay. So all these iterative processes, similarly they do in differential equations, similarly you do in integral equations, and in any functional equation, try to convert the problem as the search for a fixed point for a contraction. Many places you may not get contraction, but wherever you are successful to set up the problem in that language, the contraction of theorem immediately tells you, you know how to get the solution. You can start with any guess and then go on iterating, you will get the solution. So this contraction of theorem was the first major theorem which was used to establish the existence of solutions for many functional equations, and the completeness of the space plays the most crucial role there. If that was incomplete, you would have done the iteration, got the sequence, it will be Cauchy, but it will not be converging to anything at all. So the completeness is therefore is the key element there in all iterative processes. Whatever iterative process you do, it should be in the right metric space, and that metric space must be a complete metric space. Okay. And contraction gives the existence, uniqueness, everything of the fixed point. Okay. Of course, the fixed point theory itself is a very sophisticated theory, but this is the first fixed point theorem. Okay. Later people will ask, suppose I did not have contraction, what will I do? How do I assess? So there are many fixed point theorems. They get more and more complicated and highly topological in nature and analysis in nature, and it becomes a subject of its own. Okay. That's how what happens. It gets more and more sophisticated, more and more abstract, and becomes a subject of its own until it reaches a stage which has lost memory about from where it all started. So today you could listen to a speaker in specialist in topology or something like that, algebraic topology, giving a talk on fixed points and existence, who would know nothing about Gauss-Seidel or Jacobi or relaxation methods. He has lost touch with the ground realities. He has become a very abstract man. Okay? But it all started from here. Okay? And you keep your foot firmly on the ground and keep on looking at how it is related to my matrix problem, because finally today everything is converted to matrix problem. Go to MATLAB and get things done. So it's all boils down to where is the connection with that. Okay, don't lose that connection. Okay, I think this is the right place to stop. Okay, so that is what completeness is all about. Okay. So in the next class I will briefly introduce, suppose the space is not complete, there is a process by which you can embed it in a complete metric space. That is called completion of an incomplete metric space. I will not go through all the details. I will just indicate what one does.